Welcome to this session on project estimation. My name is Jacob. I'll be your host for the coming 30 minutes or so. It's really cool to be here in Poland. It's actually the first time that I've actually been to Poland. I think I've laid over flying some time, and I heard here that this is the second Drupal camp, and I think it looks amazing. So it's really cool to be here, and it's a beautiful city. So I'm having a great time, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the rest of the events can offer. So on to the topic here. My name is Jacob. You may have heard of the company that I co-founded some years back called Node1. How many have heard of Node1? Okay, not that many, come on. All right, we probably didn't work hard enough on our Polish marketing campaigns then. So I co-founded Node1 back in 2007. Together with 3 other people. And since fall last year, I'm on my own. I left the company, and I'm still doing Drupal. I love the community. I travel around to camps like these, conferences. I talk about Drupal. I talk about the possibilities with it. And there's some more Drupal stuff coming, from my part of the world soon. So watch out for the news. This session is the one I usually hold together with my co-presenter, Shannon. Shannon could not be here. She's stuck in Paris at Commerce Guys, managing their projects. So I'm going to do her parts on my own. Someone there is doing like a victory sign. Sorry? What? Sorry. No, I'm just, never mind. All right, so on to the topic here. If you have questions during this presentation, you can use this hashtag. And I'm gonna open the Twitter feed, so we can both talk about the Twitter questions and any questions you might have at the Q&A after this session. So, why are you here? Well, in our line of work, estimation is something we have to do as part of projects. And as I was discussing with Tim here over lunch, it may not always be ideal, but customers want to have an idea about costs, so we have to estimate. And estimation is something I started talking about way back in 2010 at the DrupalCon in Copenhagen. I did a talk there on project estimation, or getting early estimates right, as I called it, because it outlined a way to do estimates even when you don't really know that much about the project, at least come up with a number. And that session was extremely popular. I was really surprised at that, because I thought estimation is so boring and so annoying that no one really wants to talk about it, and even less listen to it. But it's what I was doing most at that time. But it turned out there was a lot of people that didn't like it, but had to do it, and they would love to learn everything that you could about it. So the session you're about to see now is the development of that session. Now we're not just going to talk about early estimates, but other ways to estimate, the things that are important to keep in mind. But either way, how many of you feel like this when you have to estimate? Not many scared. Okay, 5 scared kitties. Okay, all right. The brave ones. How many feel like this? Oh, no. How many feel like this? All right. So, if you recognize any of those feelings when it comes to like sitting down with that RFP from that customer, like I have to come up with a number here, you come to the right place. So in this session, I'll cover a bunch of points here. What an estimate is, a bunch of techniques, and so on. I'm gonna have to see my screen here, because it's gonna make it easier. So what is an estimate? Well, an estimate is, according to Wikipedia, sort of technically, it is an approximation of a result when you don't really know what you're talking about. And estimates are usually, when we think about estimates, we think, oh, you ask a programmer and say, I can write that in half an hour, and it turns out to take 2 days. And that's because there's so much more in estimate than just writing a bunch of code and running it in browser and like, wow, it works. I'm the best. I mean, how many of you have developers working for you with that kind of mentality? The king of jQuery sort of mentality? I guess most of you do. But there's so much more in estimate. In many cases, you have to clarify the requirements. You have to do a lot of theming to make it look good or even work in the major browsers. You have to do testing, both manually click and make sure that what you build is what customer asks for, but also automated testing. and training, deployment, and managing the whole thing. So requirements, how many of you do requirements in the shape of user stories? How many are familiar with the concept of user stories? User stories. So user stories is a very simple way to describe functionality. It describes functionality on a site in a way the customer understands. And it's basically a line that says, me as a user would like to be able to log in order to find my receipts or something. So it describes a role, basically a role on the site, a function it needs, and why it needs to function. The problem with user stories is that it's very good for the customer. Oh yeah, we want that. Oh, we like that. That's good. But for the developers, they don't tell them anything about what are the prerequisites. What happens if the user doesn't have an account? What happens if you can't log in? What happens if you don't have any receipts on the site? So for that reason, it's good to turn some of the big user stories into use cases. And on the slide, you can see some of the differences between them. But if you really want to really be able to understand the user stories, and because some of them have a lot of hidden functionality, which you need to estimate, which is hard to see right away. Look into turning them into use cases. This is worthwhile for the big use stories, because you're going to see, and your developers are going to get it much easier for them to figure out, all the hidden functionality and all the fringe cases that might occur. Also, you're going to do a lot of UA refinement. Sometimes you get the specification of the customer with a lot of wireframes. But over the course of the project, change their mind, or the graphic designer jumps in later and starts making it look pretty. So this thing's going to change. You're going to have to take this into account when you do your estimates. How long time this is going to take. The actual coding, this is what we usually think of when we think estimates. Oh, writing the code, because that's what most of us drove us to this business, and what's sort of what we think is fun. The other stuff we have to do in order to do the coding. And then automated testing. How many here are doing automated testing on a regular basis? One person, 2, 3. All right. Oh, this is like a trick. I can tell people there are a bunch of things you can learn over a weekend that are really going to save your life. I used to say that they were regular expressions and jQuery. But I'm going to have to add automated testing. Automated testing is basically code that tests your site to make sure it does what it should. It means that when you have been working on this project for several months, you can safely add new functions, write new modules without feeling that you might break the old ones. These are called regression bugs. The bugs that you go away and you think they're gone, but they come back and bite you, bite your rear end. It's not fun. And automated testing is a great way to avoid those. And there might be like a pain in the ass. Oh, to write that code, I have to write that code first. But once you get a hang of it, life is fun again. I can tell you, life is fun even when you're debugging. But that's something you need to take into account too. And finally, training the customer and putting the site live. Are you going to host the site? Is someone else going to host the site, and so on? Who's going to train the developers? Who's going to train the editors? Are you going to have to write some kind of a cheat sheet? Are you going to have to write a manual? Are you going to have classes in your offices? And then, of course, the project manager. Unless we don't need another project manager. We got our own. Well, honestly, no, it doesn't work that way. They can't manage your team. They can manage the internal expectations of the customer, their project manager, but you're the only one who can manage your team and your requirements, and you're the one who understands the software. So don't fall for that one. Like, oh, they have their own project manager. Let's sort of scratch all the PM time. Right. So, what are estimates good for? Well, 3 things: planning, budgeting, and communicating with the customer. Planning is probably what we usually think of. The customer asks, when will it be done? And there are usually 2 ways of coming up with that. You either, see, now my clicker here is clicking out. So you either choose a team. I think Shannon made these slides, so they're sort of animated. Let's hear. You choose a team, then you block their time based on the estimate. Or You do the opposite way. You get a deadline, and then you choose your team that can work within that deadline. But watch out, because it's very important to know that teams can't work all the time. Imagine, oh, we have a 115-hour estimate. Oh, that will fit within 3 weeks, given the velocity of my team. I mean, how many hours of work they can do per week? In fact, teams aren't that effective. Like, generally, in a day, you can't usually work 8 hours effectively. I mean, there are a lot of other things on the tables, maybe internal projects, maybe meetings, people who have to go to the bathroom and have to eat lunch, surprisingly. So take that into account too when you make your plan. Hours are one thing, but planning is something else. And ideally, we think it's a highway, it's a straight road. You just drive straight down, you can put the pedal to the metal. But usually it's more like this. It's like a trail up in the Andean mountains with goats and llamas and whatnot. And more often than it would like, it's a total traffic jam. You know, we're moving a meter a minute. And the result is usually something like this. So as you can see here, here's a plan here over 2 months of April and May, and we have 3 projects, project A, B, and C. And C is the biggest one, A is mid-size, and B is the smallest. So we start working on project B here, and everything is going well until 19th of April, when we were like, we're shipped, we're done. And in parallel, we'll be running project A. Project A is finished on the 20th, and like, yeah, finally. But the customer comes back then and says, oh, we need a few extra adjustments, so you have to ask your team to work the weekend here. Because there's no way, because on the 22nd, on the 23rd here, you're starting project C. But you shipped us for adjustments, your team is happy, you buy them some Coke, you buy them some pizza, you know, you treat them nicely, they're nice people, they like you, so it works. So you start project C. Project C is running well, the team is happy, they can focus on one project now. Until the 8th, when the customer goes, we have a massive bug, you have to fix it right away. So your developers who really knew how the function worked on project C, they have to switch over to project B. Meanwhile, project C is being delayed, and your team has to work a weekend here. Essentially ruining morale, and you know, people like this is like the idea of working in a small web development company. It's nice, it's small, you have a small office, it's sort of get-go attitude, but it also means a lot of late nights, a lot of Coke, a lot of pizza. You recognize this, right? This is sort of the romantic view of a company. Like, we're here together, we're going to work nights, but we're doing it together. It's fun. It's fun until you're 28 and you have kids. Which is like, a lot of us started in this in the early 20s, and we also hired people that like that attitude. But it's not sustainable. And this is the scenario that we'd like to avoid when we plan, and try to plan around it. Estimates are also used to budget. More often than not, they use to budget. And usually the budget is like a scale. You have the stuff the customer wants, and you have the customer's budget. Now, we know the budget, but the stuff they want, we have to figure out what it's worth to the customer and how much it costs to produce. The problem is that the cost of production won't become evident till the end of the project. And that's where the estimates come in. This is the cost we have to figure out way before, somewhere back here, ideally. The value, though, the value is much easier. The customer can usually pretty early on in the project tell you how much it's worth. That blog there that's the one is that important, because the marketing department, they're going to set up this campaign here, and it's part of engaging our audience or engaging our buyers or something. They can usually figure out the business rationale for things, as long as you talk with the right person. That's important. But it's much harder for the team. So this works out, the cost versus the business value. But the team, though, the yellow labels, that won't come until much later. And also, we have to remember that the business value of something is actually much more definite, if you know it, than the estimate. The estimate still has a lot of risk built in, a lot of inaccuracy. And while you can actually know that, like I said, the business value early on, the estimates won't actually become accurate until the end of the project. And seeing this team now as estimating, they're estimating this box here at 80 to 120 hours. There are 3 things that are weighed in there. It's the complexity, the familiarity, and dependency. The complexity is how complicated is this piece of software? How's the likelihood that this software could break? How does it match our knowledge level? Does it require techniques that we have to use? For example, if half the team doesn't know object-oriented programming, and you have to do it in this case, that's going to add time. It's going to be a learning curve. Also, familiarity. Is this a problem area we used before? Have we done the similar solution? And dependencies. Do we have to integrate with third-party APIs or services and so on? And all of these may differ. If you're high on familiarity and low on the complexity and dependency, your estimate is probably going to be pretty high, pretty spot on. But if you're high on complexity and high on dependency, it's a big risk built in there. So we can lay these out as a grid, like this. So on one axis we have the value that it's bring to the customer, and the other we have the effort and the risk combined. So a high effort, much time taken, and high risk combined with the value. So, for example, there are certain things here that I call low-hanging fruit. The stuff that you just reach up and bring down. And those are the ones that actually have high value and low risk, low effort. Those are the ones you want to do first. Then you want to work the ones. Then you want to work on the ones that actually, the best way to do is actually start these two ones at the same time. Does anyone know why you want to do a lot of high effort, high risk things early in the project? The reason is that a lot of high effort risk things, they can take much longer than you want. And if they bring value, the customer will want to do them. So if you start them early, you have a much better chance of adapting the project to those and actually shipping them on time than starting them in the late part, because that might mean that they're going to end up half finished. And half finished product functionality is a waste. So you do those first, and the green ones. These are your priorities. These are the functions that you would much rather do. Finally, you do the yellow ones, which are low risk, low effort, low value. But they're sort of like, if you have time over and everything, they're good to do. The ones you don't want to do at all are the red ones. So imagine we would have a bunch of features, a bunch of boxes laid out like this. You would want to do them in this order, as you can see here. I don't like animated slides. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. That's the order you would want to do them in. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb. So by estimation and looking at risk and these factors, you can also plan your project. So you do the function in the way that will mean you'll be able to ship as much value for the customer as possible. But estimates also serve as communication devices, for good and for worse. So in this case, for example, when you give a customer an estimate, you're going to tell them something about how you're thinking. The team wants the customer to understand this is a high estimate, this is really hard to do. And the customer wants to understand, do they really understand how complex this is? Because if you give them a low number, they're going to want where did these guys come from? Do they have any experience at all? And it gets really extreme in the case of the RFP. How many of you have been dealing with RFPs? Okay, some of you. Okay, so for RFPs, request for proposals, is a very formalized process, and there's a lot of paperwork involved. The point of that is to make the process as fair and open as possible to the buyers and to the bidders. And it's usually done when you buy stuff like government or municipalities buy services. They just want to show that they use the tax money in a responsible way. And in those cases, you usually can't provide much documentation. The bottom line often counts. So in this case, your estimate may be low and it may be accurate, but the buyer thinks that no, that just reflects your lack of experience. And I think the more experienced thing would be to go buy from the big company, big expensive company. And you know the old saying, you can't get fired for buying from IBM. And that's something I think all of us have been facing in selling Drupal. Ideally, if you think the same and the customer gets why you're setting that estimate and you actually understand what customers do, then you have Drupal love. And that's where we all want to be. Happy customers, happy project. But things go to hell sometimes, more often than we'd like. And here's where risk management comes in. And right, you don't want a train wreck. You don't want to hassle the half. So you can you can you can you can mitigate risks. You can make them less bad for your project by assessing them and planning for them. So I'm going to go through some ways that you can plan for your risks. First of all, it's important to identify risks. What risks are there? And there are several risks that are sort of common. I mean, I guess all of you have faced these ones. I mean, the UI is easy to change. It says you're super great CSS programming, you know? He's reading the standards books and everything. You know, he would love to go to sort of to an event apart, you know, and talk to Jeffrey Seldman, you know. The API is stable. It says your API guy, who's a REST Nazi, you know, essentially. It's like, if it's not REST, it's not good. It's not my problem. It says your guy sort of just cares about his stuff. Maybe you're a Photoshop guy who just makes sure it looks really nice. And isn't it out of the box? It says the eternal optimist. And of course, the one that you heard Martin say earlier, there's a module for that. Rule number 35, there's a module for that. So I'm sure you heard a lot of these expressions once or twice in your project. And they're all potential risks. So when you manage risks, you identify them and then you rate them. You rate them in two factors. You rate them on the impact and the probability. The impact is how bad they are, probability is how likely they are to occur. And you can lay them out like a table like this. For example, a shared sign-on function can potentially be very risky because maybe the third-party API has bugs in it. And that would have a high rating. But then there are also things like I call, you know, black swans, things that are so unlikely that you wouldn't even take it in there. And that would be something like your team getting the flu. Imagine half your team getting the flu, half the company. That could really delay your project. And that's a real possibility over long term, and you know, if you have tight deadlines. That's something you need to think of. And we usually don't think of stuff like that. So when we have the risks, when I have a risk rating, the combined number here, the composite risk, then we can actually lay them out. We can rate them as low, medium, high. And we can also start seeing how much attention should pay to them. Risks that are low, we can ignore those. They're probably not going to happen, or if they happen, the impact is so low. But then there are those that you want to keep an eye on regularly, stuff that you want to keep in your table and consider every week. And Shanna told me something, a really cool idea she has, that every week she has a risk workshop with her team. And she asks the team to come in there and come up with everything that could potentially go wrong and what they think is going on wrong in the project. And that way, she lifts it up, and she's able to monitor those risks before they happen. So even if you just have a weak, you know, itch, you know, you lower your spine, you know, like this could really go wrong. I'm not really sure. They're really slow at responding over that company. There could be a problem later on where we really need fast help from them because they're really not really good at managing their customer requests or something. That's something to watch out for. So talk to your team if you're a project manager and get these things up on the surface early on so you can watch out for them. A way to show to the customer is to lay it out like this. It's a fancy colored table. And everything in the top right are the bad stuff. Lower left is like, yeah, you know, it's no problem. But what do you do about the risks? Well, there are a number of strategies you can perform. You can accept the risk, do nothing about it. It's like small things, so no problem. You can eliminate them. Essentially, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that module which integrates with 5054 beta stage APIs. You can limit them. You can say, yeah, we're going to do that part, but not that part. Or you can talk to customer. Okay, this is a big problem, and we're not going to take full accountability, and we're prepared to do it if you're prepared to share some of the risk. If this is going to go over budget, you're going to have to pay for all of it, or we're going to split it. But we want you to understand, if you really want to do this, we can't do it under these terms. All right, so finally, about the techniques, which is actually the topic of the conversation. So the reason I haven't brought this up earlier is because I think it's so important to consider what's in an estimate before I actually sit down there and do it. So I'm going to go through some of the common estimation techniques. And the one that I guess many of you are familiar with is the one that I presented earlier, the one that I call an earlier weighted estimate. And that composes of breaking down your project into all the tasks involved, the modules you have to write, the panels you have to create, all that stuff, and to a level which makes sense. And then you put an estimate on it, and you put basically a risk rating. The ones I call degree of experience. In my case, I used in order to make this risk more tangible, something you can relate to, I see it as a way to determine how well you know this functionality. Have you done it before? How difficult was it? Do you know someone you can talk to, someone whose judgment you trust, and so on? That's the one way to make this risk sort of easier to relate to in a way. And then you get a range. And you will want to you get a range estimate, and customers don't like that because they want a fixed number. But that means that you give the customer a reason to help you get more information so you can lower that range. Because the more sure you get about the estimate, the less, the smaller the range will get, the less risk rating. Another method is the Delphi method. And this one is commonly practiced in Agile as planning poker. How many of you use planning poker here to estimate? Okay, cool. Planning poker is so simple. You basically take your team and put them in a room, and you usual product owner, you explain the feature to them. And every person in the team has a set of cards with a set of numbers on them. And these are estimates in story points or hours or whatever you use. The thing is, they're on a fixed scale, like 2, 5, 10, 20, 50 or something. And the team is asked to hide their cards and reveal them at the same time. And the reason for this is because you don't want people to conform. You want people to actually give their guess, not what they think they should, or do the cheating and look at the one they think is the most experienced person in the team. And the good thing about this is that if two people come up with totally wildly different estimates, there's usually some kind of uncertainty here regarding what it involves, or maybe a difference in experience and knowledge between the two of them. Right, so we've actually the ballpark top-down actually got skipped, but the ballpark top-down is essentially when you ask your developer to say how long was this going to take, and then you multiply by 3. It's good in projects where they're working on them a long time, the customer just asks for something else and want a quick answer. Then you have enough experience to do that securely. But I would not do that. I would not do that kind of thing, in an entirely new project if you have no experience of the problem area, the problem space. So they each have pros and cons. The ballpark down is general strategy, decisions. When decisions, it's more important to make a fast decision than be accurate. They're easy, fast, inaccurate. They help for quick decision making. The weighted estimates are good if you really want to drill down into something. The drawback is that they can give you a sense of having a good idea about all the risks and an inaccurate degree of certainty. The Delphi is probably the best in many ways, and it's also why it's used in Agile. And it's a good balance between how much time it takes and the quality of the results rendered. What's important, though, is to realize that spending a lot of time in estimating doesn't mean you get good results. At a certain point, you start to validate your own thinking, and you start to work on details, and eventually you come up with a much worse number. And this graph is not something I drew just to make a point. This is actually research. They've actually tested this with a series of estimators and compared how much time they spent on it, how well the estimate actually turned out to be in the end. So when I estimated, I spent about an hour, 2 hours. I always time boxed it before I started. So don't play the blame game. Don't point fingers to whoever did the estimate or it was wrong or something. And don't estimate what you don't know. You can't estimate what you don't know, essentially. And don't estimate in a vacuum. Don't estimate out of the context. And that's why I think ballpark estimates are okay, because you're actually in the situation, you're in the context. Then it's perfectly fine to estimate. So understand the problem and estimate with someone, or let the estimates be done by someone who understands them. Management by estimate. Estimates is not a good way to judge someone's performance if you're a manager. I mean, estimates are just guesses, so don't be too hard on people. And like I said, they include much more than just development. They're more than just numbers. There's a lot of implicit ideas in estimates. And use the risk management strategies to watch out for things before they happen. So thanks everyone for listening. We have 15 minutes of questions and answers here, so on with the kiddies and the ducks. Yeah. Maybe we have a mic to pass around here.
Well, in your presentation about risks and estimations, you gave there a lot of numbers which are in practice really good when somebody wants to look at numbers in Excel, but when in practice you get to the point where it actually occurs, how long did it cost the team to realize the task? What do you do with the other estimates when it occurs that the first task took longer, for example? I mean, don't you think that sometimes it's better to estimate in terms of complexity and not in terms of time, actually? So you can compare your tasks. So for example, you estimate the first task, and then you see that the other task is more complicated. So if the first task was, let's say, 5 in some unit, the second task is 2 times more complicated, so it is 10. But in practice, nobody knows how long would it be in some time units. So I mean, maybe it would be better to estimate in not in concrete numbers or concrete time number, but more relative to the complexity of the task.
Ideally, the ideal way, I believe, in doing these things is to use story points. That's the ideal estimation tool. I've been thinking a lot about these things lately, and I think that one of the problems why we can't use story points in Drupal shops because we can't really apply Agile. And Agile was built by, it came up as a solution to the problem that big banks that were building like internal software, the management felt they were just pouring money into the box and they didn't see the results. So basically, it never materialized, or there was bad accountability. So they focused on delivering tangible results regularly. And so instead of having exact specs, it never really worked out, or it never panned out. Said, okay, let's work with a minimal specification and face problems as they occur. That means that we can be agile. We can actually change our minds when we realize how long something takes to do, if it's difficult, and so on. And in that case, a team would actually do something called story points. How many here are familiar with the concept of story points? Okay, so I guess that would take some explaining. So in Scrum, how fast a team is, how much code they write, something called velocity. So when the team is just formed, you do a project, you do a few sprints, and you find like a piece of functionality, a user story, a backlog item, which is sort of of an average size. And the team agrees on its size in points. The point scale, usually a size like 10, 15 points is finely grained enough, finely granular, enough granular for it to make sense. And when they do all this, it's exactly like you said, they compare the work. Is this more, is it less? So if another story is bigger, then double it. If it's smaller, they halve it. Eventually, as the team gets more and more comfortable with the project and with the problem space and everything, these estimates get more and more accurate. And eventually, the team can also more accurately predict how much they're going to deliver in the next sprint. They know that we did 95 story points last sprint. That means we can probably do 95 next sprint too. And they often accelerate as they learn more and more of the project. The thing is, the kind of estimate that you described require that you actually can compare these two pieces of functionality, and which is very difficult if you haven't worked on the project earlier, which is why this kind of estimation is very hard to do with a project which you never worked on before. And story points are ideal too, because the team that's going to build it, they commit not just to the estimate, they commit to the estimation method. They know that they're not being overruled by some control freakish project manager who wants to look good in front of the customer and make sort of high-flying promises, which the team then has to sort of sacrifice their weekends to deliver on. But the problem, like I said, is that in many Drupal shops, we have external buyers which may not want to or may not be able to actually serve as product owners, actually be involved and meet the team face to face as much as possible. And also we have to juggle several projects in parallel. And at Node 1 we had sometimes teams working on 3 projects in parallel. This meant that every team member had to be up to date on every project so we could actually handle people being on sick leave. What I believe these days is that the best solution is to have small teams that are entirely focused. Because we couldn't put 6 people working on one project, because like it meant that they would deliver 240 hours in a week, and you eat up a budget real fast that way. They're flying too fast to be able to make decisions. If you sit half a day and try to make a decision, this is the difficulty of talking to customers on. You already burnt like 4 times 4 hours. You burned 16 hours. And if you're an even bigger team, it's just a factor of 4. Half a day is real money. So I believe these days is to work exactly like you said, using story points and use small teams of up to 2-3 people, and work long terms instead. So you actually can get enough experience with the project to make accurate estimates.
Okay, thank you.
Especially in smaller projects, I find it sometimes difficult to estimate how much I can do with existing modules. Coming back to this proverb, there's a module for that. Yeah. So if I see a module which is a candidate for having that functionality, maybe it works and I'm ready after an hour. Or maybe I install it and it turns out that it's not really stable, and then it could take me a few days. And if it turns out that it's total bunk, it can take me 1 or 2 weeks. Yeah. So how do you handle this high variety of risk?
I think what we learned was to read the issue queues. First of all, if a module is in beta, it is in beta for a reason. It could be that it's a very maybe Linux influenced developer, because Linux software and the kernel especially has been in like less than version 1 release for a really long time, because open source developers are really, something doesn't go in a sharp release, it's really done. In commercial software, they release buggy software. Look at Adobe. Adobe releases really horrible software. They make gold releases of software that should be in beta or alpha stage by some other measure. But read the issue queue. If it is a beta, see what the issues. If there are there any critical issues that are really blocking it, and if those are there, use as a quality measure. So I would probably use a quality scale of 1 to 5 and estimate it, and then if the customer really wants a fixed number, do a really pessimistic estimate. But then you can work it out that if your planning allows it, say the customer, if it takes less time, you're going to pay less. Or make them commit to an exploration phase where you spend 1-2 hours just looking at it, see what solves the problem, and then you can make a much better informed estimate. That would be 2 ways. Or find a way where you actually do an exploration phase, and if they pay you money, but if they get the project, you pay it back or something like that. Sort of a risk sharing, because it's not fair for you to be able to look at a module and then give a fixed number. That's unrealistic. But that's what we did essentially. We tried to get better at finding the bad modules and then try to share the risk with the customer. And something we did in many projects was selling a pilot phase. We did a pilot study of about 50 to 100 hours. And the pilot study was not just us doing estimation. We did a lot of other things. We did content strategy. We built up all the content types, taxonomies, panels and everything. So if they didn't want to go with us, you could take the same document, go to another Drupal shop, and they would still get value for it. It was valuable. We sold value, not just offloaded our work onto let them pay for it. I haven't checked I'm going to check the Twitter feed real quick here.
I have one question to you regarding sharing the risk with the customer. That was on one of the slides as one of the possible solutions, especially for high-risk tasks. And my question is, how do you communicate that with the customer, especially when you're approached and you don't have secured this project first? how to communicate well that some of the parts are really difficult and risky and might simply fail, because this might affect your image as a developer or a shop when you just admit that some of the tasks, some of the features you don't know well or might fail during the development. So how to communicate it well and yeah, make the customer believe that you will find a way to do it eventually.
In my experience, I think the buyer experience is really critical here. Because if you can lift the discussion to the point that this thing is really difficult and we would ideally not do it, but how much is it worth to you? And if they actually do a business value analysis and figure out this is not really that important to what we're trying to achieve, you can talk on those terms instead about whether you cannot solve a problem. Because if they're really just out to watch their back and don't really care about doing the best thing for their employer, they just want to shift blame, then they're not a good buyer, and you're going to be in trouble down because there's no trust in the relationship. So, but try to isolate those parts, limit the risk of those tricky parts, and if they want to do them, do the discussion based on how much it's worth to them versus how much time you're going to put in, and try to put them on a running account under those reasons. But if they are critical for them, for these things to get shipped, try to find a shared risk model, because it's not fair, and it's going to deteriorate your relationship, and they're not going to, for them, your relationship is not just valuable to you, it's valuable to them too, because they're in bed for you for a long time. You know, support, service, and everything. And even if you want to end the relationship with you, they want you to cooperate with a new company that do the site. So it's in both your interests to make sure there's trust. Yeah.
What do you think about lowering the estimates to win the projects? Because often, especially I think, maybe not in Poland, but there are some companies that lower their estimates just to win the project from the client, and then they say, okay, oh, you wanted this one, oh, so it's more, this one will cost you more, and this one will cost you more. So when we try to estimate something, follow all the rules you just pointed out, and we do really good and most accurate estimate we can do, and then there's a company that comes in and says, oh, we're going to do it half time. So that's, what do you think? Well, obviously it's not good practice, but do you come across it often?
We have major companies, like 52,000 consulting companies that basically went out against Node 1 on hours. But they have much less experienced developers, so they took them longer time to ship the projects. It got more expensive in the end, and much less quality. And there are also smaller shops that basically undercut it, on just being very naive about how long something takes. And they're just owner-driven shops, maybe two guys that are really into this, and they can work day and night, and they don't have to consider, anything else. They don't have to think about paying people salaries and everything. So they can take on this project. In my opinion, it's about the buyer. Again, it's the buyer competence. And IT is weird, because this is actually one of the few places where you actually have to be competent to buy the services. And if the buyer is competent and wants to make sure they have a long-term relationship, and like I said, they want to have trust here, they're going to go with a buyer. The seller doesn't have the lowest price, but actually shows commitment and actually to understand and want to have a working relationship here. So I think you got to work on those axes too. If they're just looking for price, there's the other thing you could do is just make an offer that it's not comparable. Make it incomparable. Maybe you can turn part of your offer into a service, so it's split over time. Maybe you can host some of the solution on your server. Nowadays you can't just take the two quotes and just lay them side by side. I think that's probably one of the best strategies in business, to make your business, you make your offer incomparable to your others, which means that you can dictate the terms on what you're selling if it's incomparable. If you can comparison shop, it's much harder. Then the easy strategy is just like lowest price, but you don't want to be a low price web business, because you have to cut corners everywhere.
The second question, quick one, do you really do the estimates in an hour, or you said something that you do them really quick? Because if you are preparing an estimate for, you want to win a project, yeah, so there are several other companies that are preparing the estimate. It often takes I don't know, whole day to list all the risks, do all the estimates with all the team developers and stuff like that. So an hour seems to be very short time.
I did them in about 2 hours, and the reason for that, I set a time limit for myself. Because if you overdo them, first of all, it's a waste of your time, and secondly, the quality of the estimate doesn't get higher. It can even get lower if you spend too much time. You have to figure out the purpose of the estimate. The estimate is usually to place you enough of a ballpark for it not to be not to reflect negatively on you in the entire bidding process with the other bidders. And secondly, enough for you to know what you're basically signing up for. So figure out why you're estimating first, and then set the limit how much time it's worthwhile. Do like basically a return on investment, cost-benefit analysis of the whole thing before you take on it. I know in many cases we had companies, we had like organizations, like they were sort of volunteer organizations. They had like a budget of 50,000 euros. For us, that was a small project, but they basically had hired a professional consultant to write a requirements document that would probably cost them 25,000 euros, just writing a requirements document. And we saw that, and we saw the level, the quality, and of course we put a bid of about 100,000 euros, because that's what it looked like. But no, they had wasted like a third of their budget just in getting requirements down. I was like, so we told them, no, we can't deliver all this, you gotta be serious, but they're like, but they probably took the advice that good requirements is the key to a successful IT project, but it's not that simple.
Can you give us some tips on estimating risks with third-party integrations? Sometimes API is poorly documented, sometimes there are frequent changes, and I think it's even harder to estimate than there's a model for that problem.
I would talk to your colleagues, which is why Drupal camps are so great, because you get to talk to other businesses that have done similar work, and ask how they approached the problem, what the issues were, and how they solved them, and be open about this stuff. Because if you give the information, you're going to get it back. And that's what I love about Drupal, the fact that we have this really open attitude to sharing knowledge and sharing what we learn from working with customers. We don't compete at that level. We compete against we compete for something bigger. They compete for Drupal. But be open about it, talk to other companies, and try to isolate it. If you really feel this is risky, try to break it out so separate from the rest of the project. Because in the end, if you make a low estimate, you're gonna hit your budget, but the customer is gonna get it shipped late. It's gonna affect the relationship. You're gonna be a really cranky seller. They don't want to have a cranky seller. They're gonna get a cranky buyer, and in the end, it's not gonna be a successful project. Low estimates, like the customers that think that they can come out, winning by tricking you as a seller into overcommitting. That's naive. It doesn't work, and I think it's pretty good to be open about that early on. And if they can't see that, ideally you would be able to skip that customer, just pass them, and go for another. I got some questions here on. We're running over time. I got some questions on Twitter, so if you guys want to talk to me, just look me up. I'll try and ask you questions afterwards. Thank you again so much.